This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to Disabled Persons Assembly's Notable Radio Show. DPA is a systemic advocacy organisation run by and for disabled people. DPA is a pan-impaired organisation with members across the country. Over the next half hour, we'll discover how we can work collaboratively to achieve inclusion for all New Zealanders. DPA's Notable Radio Show, a whole new attitude.
Kia ora, this is DPA's Notable Radio. I'm your host, Amy Taylor. Today we are speaking with someone who is very familiar to our DPA Notable Radio listeners, former host, Chris Ford. Hi, Chris, how are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you, Amy. Kia ora to you, Amy, and to all our listeners. Good to be back on the show.
Haha, yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it?
It has indeed.
We've missed you.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
So, Chris, today you're here in your newish role as policy advisor, Southern and Central. I keep saying new, but it's not really new anymore. It's coming on for a couple of years. Can you tell us about this role?
Well, the role is about assisting and ensuring that the voice of disabled people is listened to and represented effectively to influence central and local government policy that has either a direct or indirect impact on the lives of disabled people, on us as disabled people. We also advise and inform the policy team and other DPA stakeholders about issues that impact on disabled people. I also liaise with kaituitui such as yourself and our colleague Ingrid in Otatahi, Christchurch, and through them with local members we work on regional policy submissions, which we'll come to talk about the ones for Dunedin and Otago shortly, and act as the conduit for regional input into DPA policy through you as kaituitui. I also build relationships with key stakeholders and local government throughout the country. By the way, I must also state that I work alongside another colleague, Patipoa, who lives in Titai Tukaru, the far north of the North Island. That is
from the far north will be joining us on the next DPA Notable Radio show, and she'll be telling us about this great initiative that DPA has started with language learning, with us having some informal lessons in Te Reo Māori and New Zealand Sign Language. So we look forward to that show. Right, so thank you, Chris. 2025 was a very busy year for our policy team. I counted no less than 96 submissions, both national and local, countrywide. So well done. What a huge body of work. Simply in the interest, it's a huge body of work, Chris. Well done, really. Like 96 submissions.
Almost two a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. Over two a week, because you have to figure that the working year is around 48 weeks.
Yes, it's not quite 52 weeks, is it? But because we're short on time, we're going to focus on local submissions made to the Dunedin City Council and the Otago Regional Council in this show today, because that is topical for our listeners. So let's start by talking about the annual plans for both the DCC and the ORC. So that's the Dunedin City Council and the Otago Regional Council. What key points did DPA make about the annual plans?
Well, in terms of the DCC annual plan for, 2025-26, we supported the 750k changing places toilet, even though we do admit that we could have called for council to subsidise the key swipe purchases for people who need to use that facility, as electronic swipe keys are necessary to access it. They cost around $150, by the way, just for the benefit of our listeners, but people can access But people can access disability support, individualised funding, disability allowance and so forth to support any purchases they may need to make. We also supported the $11.22 million proposal for new destination playgrounds, which were unfortunately rejected by the council. We supported moves around spending more on supporting transport infrastructure, which the council has responsibility for example, improving bus stop accessibility and mobility curb cuts. These are all important to disabled people, our ability as disabled people to participate and be included within the community. We made particularly strong calls as well to fund new social housing, that is, council provided social housing, and South Dunedin future project related infrastructure projects. We also called for the speeding up of infrastructure projects related to free waters as well. In terms of the Otago Regional Council annual plan, the biggest priority with the Regional Council was to emphasise our ongoing calls for better emergency preparedness and responsiveness for disabled people from the Council. We called for disabled people to be prioritised, particularly when it came to evacuation scenarios, something I do know personally about. The need for more accessible information in emergency situations for deaf and disabled people. To enable this, we called for more staff capacity training around disability and emergency responsiveness within the Regional Council. We also emphasised the need for continuing to expand public transport accessibility, which they do have a responsibility for disabled people through the rollout of new accessible electric buses and interregional services, for example, the Oamaru Dunedin or Oamaru service, which is currently being trialled as I understand it, or has been trialled. We also praise their ongoing work in terms of managing natural hazards, climate change and adaptation, and flood planning. This is all relevant when it comes to living in a climate change impacted world for everybody, including disabled people. Disabled people are being disproportionately impacted by climate change, and this has been validated by international and New Zealand-based research.
Absolutely, Chris. And it's really climate change is coming to our front doors and influencing us as just as ordinary citizens as well, as you know all too well. And Chris was evacuated from his home during, was it the October flooding?
October 2024, as a matter of fact, during the
Oh
three-day
gosh,
storm event.
I'm losing track of time.
Yeah,
Holy
I know.
interim time. Yes, so October 2024 flooding, Chris was evacuated from his home. So we really, it's becoming incredibly topical for disabled people, especially because there are certain vulnerabilities that disabled people have in climate change emergencies that are not typical. So we've talked a bit about the annual plans. Let's talk about the 10-year plans. The 10-year plan for the DCC was actually made a 9-year plan because the government has passed the responsibilities of water management on to the local councils. So what key points did DPA make about the 9-year plan?
Well, as stated earlier, they talked about the changing places toilets.
Mhm.
They were featured in this plan as well, as were the playground upgrades and transport infrastructure improvements. As I said earlier, we were very disappointed that the proposal for Millmore community housing being built by the DCC wasn't included in this plan after a majority vote by councillors to exclude it. We called for new accessible toilets to be placed across the city as well, alongside the new changing places facility. We supported as I said earlier, the free waters upgrade proposals, particularly as they relate to or related to improving flood protection and prevention in South Dunedin, which is home to many disabled people, including myself.
Yeah, so South Dunedin is a really important area of focus for DPA Dunedin because it is a high area of disabled population. Part of the reason for this is that it's a relatively low socioeconomic area. And so we're working with the South Dunedin Futures team on the long-term flood management strategies for South Dunedin. So it's a really important piece of work that DPA is also involved in. So, budget was a significant issue and will continue to be a significant issue in both the ORC and the DCC plans. So, other than what you've already talked about, are there any other significant items that DPA thinks should have been included that were left out for budgetary reasons?
We were disappointed as well in DCC's proposal to make no investment into two packages which would have sped up the city's ability to meet its zero carbon emissions 2030 goal. As I've just pointed out, disabled people are disproportionately bearing the brunt of climate change locally, nationally, and internationally. We had no issues, however, with the regional council's annual plan, as we have a good working relationship with them. However, we're waiting to see if the new regional council will retain climate change resilience and emergency management as key priorities, given the high number of new councillors who were elected last year.
Yeah, and it's also very up in the air on how long we might actually have regional councils for at all.
Oh, and that's right, absolutely.
So there's a lot of change. It's a bit of a season of change. So some of this is really unpredictable.
It
So
is.
yeah, we're actually just having to go with the punches, aren't we, Chris? Because we don't know
We
what's
are.
our way.
It's my role alongside Patty and other members of the wider team to just keep abreast of that, including, of course, our Chief Executive, Mojo. It's just that we have to keep up with so much. But anyway, that's just part of
It's
our job.
very much, there's a lot to keep up with. So, in the long term DCCE plan, water management is key, and it's a huge budgetary issue, both in terms of what would have been the Three Waters plan at national level, and climate change and flood management in the South Dunedin area. What does this mean for disabled people?
Well, first, we'd like to acknowledge, DPA would like to acknowledge that the DCC has highly prioritised free water spending in its most recent plans. As I said earlier, there's a need to ensure climate resilience and adaptation through better resourcing and managing free waters, particularly in South Dunedin, which is home, we've just referred to a substantial number of disabled people. Enabling better climate resilience and adaptation through, for example, more effective stormwater drainage is needed to control flooding in South Dunedin, thereby leading to the need for fewer evacuations of both myself and others in future, and more time to plan for further sea level rise and also the expected rise in the water table underneath South Dunedin.
Great, thank you, Chris. So, public transport is a key issue in the ORC annual plan. And in 2025, the ORC reviewed its long-term regional transport plan. We're actually going to be having a forum on transport for the disabled community. DPA is hosting this forum in April. The preliminary date for this is the 16th of April from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. at the Nations Church in South Dunedin. So we'd love to have you all there. In the meantime, Chris, can you tell us about DPA's views on the ORC public transport plan, including the fare changes?
Sure. DPA opposed the 25% increase in public transport fares for bus users last year. At that time, we appreciated that the regional council had no real choice as central government had cut public transport funding. However, the increase affected a disproportionately high number of disabled people who rely on public transport and who live on low incomes. We've called on the ORC to mitigate any changes so that they don't fall disproportionately on people who heavily rely on public transport, including to total mobility. So far, they've listened to us, particularly when it comes to total mobility. Now, just very quickly, for the benefit of our listeners, there's currently a review of total mobility going on. The government have already announced some crucial changes, including the lowering of the fare cap and also cutting the rate of subsidy for fares, so people will be paying more for fares because at the moment the subsidy allows people to pay only up to 25% of the fare, but this is going up to around 35% as of 1 July. However, there is a review out. The Ministry of Transport is running that, and that consultation on that closes next week. But it's important to also take account of that.
Absolutely. And that is going to be an area of focus in our transport forum. We're going to have Laura Faulkner, who's from the ORC, and she is in charge of total mobility at the ORC. She's going to come and talk to us about these changes and about that review so that you have that information. The other thing that Chris didn't mention is also the cap is going down by 10% nationwide.
That's right.
So that will also make a difference to how much you are actually going to be paying your taxi driver. And this is really difficult for the disabled community because many of us do rely on total mobility. Right, so moving on from transport, we have recently heard that the DCC is proposing a 10.5% rates increase this year. What are DPA's thoughts on this?
Well, DPA believes that it's important that any rates increase doesn't disproportionately impact low-income households. However, there is financial assistance available in the form of rates assistance funded by the Department of Internal Affairs, which is available through the City Council. We're also concerned about the government proposed rates cap, as this will affect the ability of local authorities to fund local services and projects, leading to significant downstream impacts, including, for example, increased charges for existing council services like dog registration, as well as increased rents to be charged for, or potentially being charged for council social housing, both of which would also disproportionately impact lower income households and disabled people. It could also lead to a serious reduction in council spending on infrastructure and services, not only in Dunedin but around the country, affecting services like public libraries, community centres, museums and swimming pools, all services that residents, especially disabled residents, rely on for community connection and inclusion. Instead of a rates cap, what we're calling for, what we're supporting, is central government opening up more financial tools for local government to access, including, for example, returning revenue from GST paid on rates to local councils and more joint funding of pre-waters projects. If central government moves to create more funding pathways for local government, it will help contain rates rises much better than any rates cap could.
Thank you, Chris. It was very informative. So we're running low on time, but let's quickly talk about some of the smaller submissions that DPA has made to the DCC last year. Parks and Recreation was a very common theme with submissions on reserve management, the Mosgiel Recreational Area, and Logan Park Management Plan. Can you tell us about key themes and recommendations that DPA has made in terms of parks and reserves management?
Essentially, DPA discussed ways to improve accessibility both to and within our parks and reserves through, for example, creating more accessible footpaths, toileting and changing facilities, sporting and recreational amenities, better lighting, and ensuring that there are safe navigable spaces which appropriately separate cyclists and pedestrians. We don't want any unnecessary collisions between the two, as that's quite a significant safety concern, particularly for disabled and older people and
Yeah.
young children as well.
Yes, this is very true. People with mobility limitations can be very vulnerable to be perhaps be knocked over by bicycles. So there are some practical considerations there. I use parks and recreation a lot because I have relatively young children, and often mud is one of the things that really gets me. It can be very limiting. It sounds like a silly thing, but yeah, it can really limit my mobility in these spaces. And Dunedin is rather vulnerable to mud, I would say.
Yes, we are, due to poor drainage and high rainfall, relatively high rainfall.
Yes. So, what about waste minimalisation? The DCC waste minimalisation plan came out in 2025, and DPA submitted on that. What are the key points that DPA made on waste minimalisation, and how does this affect the disabled community?
Very quickly, over the years, DPA has supported making our waste recycling system more accessible and user-friendly for disabled and older people. However, we've advocated for larger waste bins as part of expanding choices for householders of having larger and smaller bins, including bigger bins for medical waste, and for families whānau who had additional needs to throw out waste, including, for example, children's or adults' nappies and sanitary products, which are used by many disabled children and adults.
Yeah, I mean, the disabled community use a number of disposable medical things like catheters and wastes associated with dialysis. So it's really important that we remember. And the DCC actually does have that does allow you to have an extra red bin if you have disabled people living in your household. However, if you have a large household, there still could possibly be limitations in the amount of space you have for waste disposal. And because this is medical waste, it's not recyclable. It needs to go in the red top bin. So it's really good to hear that DPA is on top of those submissions on waste management, because we absolutely need to decrease the amount of waste that we're producing, but we also need to make sure that we cater for everybody's needs. So, with just a few minutes remaining, can you please tell us about DPA's views on the parking changes, both on Bath Street and at the Sinclair Espionage? Gosh, I can never say that word. It's like Espionage. We noticed that the mobility parking space at Living Well Disability Resource Centre has been reinstated. That was absent for many months, so it's good to see that that is back.
Yes, it's great that the mobility parking space beside Living Well, as you say, has been reinstated. That was one of the key recommendations in our submission. It's good that they listened to us on that. We recognised that Bath Street wasn't long enough to accommodate more than one mobility parking space, and we call for the creation of more spaces in the Otago to make up for this potential shortfall. In terms of Sinclair Esplanade, we call for another mobility park to be created on the Esplanade, and for the existing two mobility parks at Second Beach to become 240-minute, in other words, 3-hour parks, so as to make it the same time limit as applies to the mobility park on the Esplanade.
Yeah, I think that is really important, because it is a place where people want to spend time and don't necessarily want to be very much limited by your parking time, because it is a place that people go for R&R, I imagine. So thanks very much for your time and your important work. Our policy team advocates hard for the disabled community on Ōtepoti Dunedin and in the wider Moto. We're wishing you all the best for your work in 2026, and we hope to see another 96 submissions.
Wow! We're working towards it. Let's just see how we go. It's been a very busy 3 years so far since the current government came in. It was busy before that, but even more so now with so much change going on at both the central and local government level.
Yes, we can certainly see that. We can see the policy team working really hard. So that is wonderful to see. So thank you, Chris. This has been DPA's Notable Radio. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Disabled Persons Assembly is Aotearoa, New Zealand's first pan-disability national organisation, providing system-level advocacy for all disabled people. Membership is free for individuals. If you'd like to know more, visit our national website at www.dpa.org.nz or contact your local kaituitui or community connector, Amy Taylor, at kaituitui.otipoti@dpa.org.nz. Disabled Persons Assembly, a whole new attitude.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.